My mother called me the night I got promoted to say my brother needed money for his rent. Not congratulations. Not proud of you. Not even a simple how are you doing. Just, Nathan needs help and you're doing so well now, so we figured you could handle it. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of my office building, still in my blazer, my hands shaking a little from the adrenaline of the best day of my career. Senior data analyst at 29. 4 years of grinding, of skipping vacations, of eating lunch at my desk while other people took long weekends. And my mother's first words to me were about Nathan. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't send the money. That was the first domino. And I had no idea that 18 months later, I'd be sitting across a conference table from my own family and their lawyer, watching my brother's face go completely white when I opened my laptop. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually matters. I grew up in the 3-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio, the middle child of 3. My older brother Nathan was 4 years ahead of me, and my younger sister Becca was 3 years behind. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. My father worked in logistics and my mother managed the books for a small dental practice. Money was always discussed in hushed tones at the dinner table, always framed as something we were running low on, something to be careful with, except when it came to Nathan. Nathan was the kind of kid who moved through life expecting things to arrive. He was charming, genuinely charming, the type of person who made you feel like the most interesting person in the room when he wanted something from you. He played lacrosse in high school, had a full social calendar, and operated under the implicit family understanding that his comfort was a shared responsibility. When he needed new cleats, they appeared. When he wanted to go to football camp 2 states over, somehow the money was found. When I wanted to take an AP computer science class that required a specific graphing calculator, my mother told me to check the library. I checked the library. I borrowed the calculator. I taught myself the rest online. I put myself through college at Ohio State on a combination of scholarships, a Pell Grant, and 3 part-time jobs. I worked the early morning shift at a campus cafe Tuesday through Friday, tutored high school kids in math on weekends, and spent 2 summers interning for barely above minimum wage just to get my foot in the door of the tech industry. I graduated with a 3.8 GPA and $11,000 in student loans, which I paid off in 2 years by living in a studio apartment with 1 window and cooking almost every meal I ate. Nathan went to a smaller school, changed his major 3 times, took 5 years to finish, and graduated with roughly $60,000 in debt that my parents quietly co-signed. When I asked my mother once, just once, why they'd helped him and not me, she said, "He needed it more." "You've always been so capable, sweetheart." I used to think that was a compliment. By the time I was 29 and got that promotion, I had been supporting myself completely for 7 years. I had a 401k. I had an emergency fund. I had finally started looking at buying a place of my own. A small condo in a neighborhood in Columbus that was starting to gentrify, close to work, close to the coffee shop where I'd started going on Sunday mornings just to sit somewhere that wasn't my rental apartment. I had saved $60,000 for a down payment. $60,000 that I had earned, saved, and protected through years of careful, deliberate, sometimes lonely choices. The condo closed on a Tuesday in March. I signed the papers, got the keys, and sat in the empty living room on the floor for about 20 minutes just breathing. I texted my best friend a photo. I posted nothing on social media. I wasn't ready to make an announcement. I just wanted to sit with it for a minute before the world had opinions about it. I made the mistake of telling my mother 2 days later. She went quiet on the phone in that specific way she had, the pause that meant she was recalibrating. "Oh," she said, wow. That's a big step. How much did you put down?" I told her. Another pause. "And then, have you told Nathan?" I hadn't, and I didn't understand why I needed to. I found out why 3 days later when Nathan called me himself. He didn't bother with small talk. "You bought a condo?" he said, and his voice had that particular edge it got when he felt like something had happened to him personally. "Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" I genuinely didn't know how to respond to that. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "How does me buying a home make you feel?" "Like you're rubbing it in," he said. "I'm struggling, Mara. You know I'm struggling. Lauren and I are trying to figure out our finances, and you're out here buying property like it's nothing." It wasn't nothing. It was 7 years of nothing. But I didn't say that. I told him I was sorry he was stressed, that I hoped things got easier, and that I had to go. I hung up the phone and sat with a feeling I didn't have a name for yet, something between guilt and a deep, creeping anger. My mother called the next morning. I was getting ready for work, half awake, unprepared. She didn't say good morning. "Your father and I have been talking," she said. "We think there's a fair solution here." "A fair solution to what, Mom?" "To the situation with Nathan." She said it like I knew what situation she meant, like we'd already agreed there was a problem that needed solving. "He's your brother, Mara. He's family. He and Lauren have been trying to buy a place for 2 years, and they can't make it work. And now you've gone and done this." I closed my eyes. "Done what? Bought a home with my own money? You have so much more than he does right now." Her voice had shifted into that tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable, the tone that meant the decision had already been made and she was just walking me through the announcement. "We were thinking, and your father agrees, that you could add Nathan to the deed, just as a co-owner. It would give him an asset, something to build on. You'd still be there. You'd still have your home." I sat down on the edge of my bed. "Mom," I said, "I don't think you understand what a deed is." "Of course I do. I've owned a home for 30 years. Then you understand that adding someone to a deed makes them a legal owner of the property. That means he'd have claim to it. He could force a sale. He could take out a loan against it. He could—" "You're being dramatic." She said it calmly. "It's just a piece of paper." "It's not just a piece of paper," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. "It's my home. I paid for it. I saved for it. Nathan had nothing to do with it. I'm not adding his name to my deed." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. "Then your father wants to talk to you," she said. My father came on the line. He was a quiet man by nature, not given to big pronouncements, but when he used his serious voice, the one he saved for things that were final, it landed differently. "Mara, I think you need to reconsider. We've talked to someone who knows about these things, and you may have some legal exposure here." "Legal exposure," I repeated. "We helped you growing up. We provided for you. There's an argument to be made that some of what you've accumulated came from the support this family gave you." His voice was careful, measured. "We're not looking to cause trouble. We just want what's fair for everyone." I hung up. Not dramatically, not with a speech. I just pressed end and set my phone face down on the dresser and stared at it. Legal exposure. That's what my father had said. My father, who had helped me with exactly nothing, who had co-signed $60,000 in student loans for Nathan, who had paid Nathan's car insurance until he was 31 years old, who had once told me that my self-sufficiency was something to be proud of and apparently meant it as a warning. I went to work. I stared at my screen. I thought about what he'd actually said. Legal exposure, an argument to be made, some of what you've accumulated, and underneath the shock, a professional part of my brain started clicking. I was a data analyst. I had spent 4 years building systems that found patterns in numbers, flagged inconsistencies, traced flows of money. I knew how to look at a financial picture and find what was wrong with it. And I had a memory that, when I was 23 and still trying to figure out if my family was as dysfunctional as I suspected, had filed something away that I'd never let myself fully examine. My grandfather had died when I was 25. My father's father, a quiet man who'd worked the same factory job for 34 years, who'd driven the same truck for a decade, who'd lived simply and carefully and left behind more than anyone expected. He'd had a modest estate, a house in Indiana that sold for around $240,000, some savings, a small investment account. My father was the executor. There were 4 grandchildren, me, Nathan, Becca, and our cousin Derek, who had cerebral palsy and lived in a group home outside of Indianapolis. I remembered sitting at my grandfather's kitchen table after the funeral, my aunt saying something about checking in on the estate accounts, and my father saying he had everything handled. I remembered thinking that was normal. I remembered, 2 years later, getting a check for $12,000 with a short letter from my father saying it was my inheritance and that the estate had been settled. $12,000. I had nodded, deposited the check, and told myself it was more than I expected. I had never asked to see the accounting. I sat in my office that afternoon and I thought about that for a long time. Then I opened a new spreadsheet. The thing about being a data analyst is that you learn to work with incomplete information. You learn to find anchors, fixed points you know are true, and triangulate outward from there. I knew my grandfather's house had sold because the sale was public record. I looked it up that evening. $247,000 sold 18 months after his death. I found my grandfather's investment account referenced in an obituary notice through a local Indiana paper that mentioned he'd been a longtime member of his credit union. I pulled what public records I could find. I started building a picture. It took me 3 weeks of evenings and one long Saturday to get to what I was looking for. I wasn't working with stolen records. I was working with publicly available probate filings, property transfers, financial disclosures that executors in Indiana are required to submit. My father had filed them. They were a matter of public record. I just had to know where to look and how to read what I found. The house had sold for $247,000. The estate's closing documents listed sale proceeds of $247,000. Accounting for realtor fees, closing costs, and a small outstanding property tax bill, the net to the estate should have been approximately $219,000. The investment account, I found the approximate value through the probate filing, had held $67,000 at the time of death. The savings were listed at $14,000. Total estate after documented expenses, approximately $294,000. My grandfather had 4 grandchildren. His will, which was filed as part of the probate record, stated clearly that his estate was to be divided equally among his grandchildren after certain specified bequests to his children. Those bequests to his children totaled $40,000 split between my father and his 2 siblings. That left roughly $254,000 for 4 grandchildren. Equal shares? Approximately $63,500 each. I had received $12,000. I sat back from my laptop. My apartment was quiet. Outside, the March wind was pushing against the window. I looked at the number for a long time. I did not panic. I did not cry. I opened another tab and started searching for probate attorneys in Columbus. I found one named Ms. Carla Whitmore, a woman whose online reviews described her as methodical and relentless in equal measure. I called her office the next morning and made an appointment. When I walked in and laid out what I had found, she looked at my spreadsheet the way someone looks at a chessboard mid-game. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You did this yourself?" "I'm a data analyst," I said. She nodded slowly. "If these figures are accurate, and the probate records are public so we can verify, your father had a fiduciary obligation to distribute these funds according to the will. If he didn't, he distributed $12,000 to me," I said. "I don't know what my siblings received. I don't know what my cousin Derek received. If Derek received a shortchange distribution and he's in a care facility," her voice was careful, "that's not just a civil matter." "I know," I said. "I know what it is." What I hadn't known, not until I started pulling the thread, was how long the thread actually was. My father, the logistics manager, the quiet man of the house, had been the executor of my grandfather's estate for 18 months before the final distribution was made. In the probate records, I found line items for executor fees, reasonable, standard. I found documented expenses for estate maintenance. And I found a transfer that was listed as a reimbursement for family support costs related to beneficiary Derek, a transfer of $41,000 to an account that, through public business records, I traced back to a checking account jointly held by my parents. It wasn't listed as a fee. It wasn't disclosed as executor compensation. It was labeled as a reimbursement for a beneficiary who was still alive, who had received, according to what I could piece together, a final distribution of $11,000. I brought all of it to Ms. Whitmore. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at me. "What do you want to do with this?" she asked. "I want to know if my cousin Derek got what my grandfather left him," I said. "And I want to know what happened to the rest of it." It took another 2 weeks to get everything confirmed. Miss Laugh. Whitmore filed a formal request for a full accounting of the estate, which, because the probate was still technically within the contestable window, we were entitled to. My father was notified. I did not tell him why. He called me on a Sunday afternoon. His serious voice turned up to a frequency I hadn't heard before. I don't know what you think you're doing, he said. I'm requesting an accounting of Grandpa's estate, I said. I'm entitled to that. This is a family matter. His voice was tight. You don't go filing legal requests against your own father. You asked a lawyer to threaten me with legal exposure over my own home, I said. I think we're past family matters, Dad. He hung up. 3 days later, my mother called, crying. She said I was tearing the family apart. She said Nathan was devastated. She said, did I have any idea what this was doing to Becca? She said, your father is not a bad man, Mara. He made some choices under pressure, and he's your father. I asked her how much Nathan had received from Grandpa's estate. She went quiet. How much, Mom? 47,000. She finally said, very quietly. But Mara, you have to understand, Nathan needed it. You were doing so well. You were always so capable. We knew you'd be fine. I thanked her for being honest with me. I hung up. I sat in my new condo on the secondhand couch I'd bought off Facebook Marketplace in the home I had saved for 7 years to own, and I let the full shape of it settle over me. My grandfather had left me $63,000. My father had given me 12. He'd given Nathan 35,000 more than my share, rerouted before the final distribution was ever made. And Derek, who lived in a group home and had no way to check, no family advocate looking out for him, no one running spreadsheets on his behalf. Derek had received $11,000 from a grandfather who had specifically, explicitly, left his estate equally to all 4 grandchildren. I thought about Derek. I thought about my grandfather driving his same truck for a decade, saving carefully, wanting to leave something behind. I thought about what $11,000 meant versus 63. I thought about who was supposed to be looking out for Derek. And then I thought about my father calling it a reimbursement. The mediation was my parents' idea. Their lawyer, a man named Mr. Alford who spoke in the slow, deliberate cadences of someone used to being the smartest person in the room, suggested it through a formal letter to Ms. Whitmore. The letter framed it as an opportunity to resolve a family misunderstanding with dignity and discretion. Ms. Whitmore called it a fishing expedition. I want to go, I told her. She sighed. I know. It wasn't going to be a mediation. I had prepared a presentation. We met on a Thursday afternoon at their lawyer's office downtown, a corporate-looking suite on the 14th floor with a view of the river. My parents sat across the conference table looking like a united front. My father in his good blazer, my mother with her hands folded the way she did when she was bracing for something. Nathan was there too, at the end of the table, arms crossed, wearing the look he'd worn since we were children whenever something was happening that he found inconvenient. Their lawyer sat at the head of the table. Ms. Whitmore sat beside me. I had my laptop. Mr. Wanna. Alfred started with a preamble about the importance of family, about not letting misunderstandings escalate into legal battles that everyone would regret. My parents nodded. Nathan stared at the table. I'm going to stop you there, I said. Everyone looked at me. I opened my laptop. I turned the screen so the table could see it. This is a summary of the estate accounting for my grandfather's estate, I said. My voice was even. I verified these figures against the public probate records, the property sale records, and the distribution documents my father filed as executor. I'm happy to go through it line by line, but the summary is this. My grandfather's estate held approximately $294,000 after expenses. His will directed equal distribution to 4 grandchildren. Equal shares would have been roughly $63,500 each. I clicked to the next tab. I received $12,000. Nathan received $47,000. I don't yet have documentation for Becca's distribution. And our cousin Derek, who lives in a group home in Indianapolis and has cerebral palsy, received $11,000, routed through a payment my father labeled as a beneficiary care reimbursement to an account he and my mother controlled jointly. The room was very quiet. I looked at my father. The color had gone out of his face in a way I recognized. Not anger, not defiance. Fear. The particular fear of someone who thought they had been careful enough. Richard, Mr. Alford started. Let me finish, I said. I wasn't loud. I didn't need to be. I clicked to the next screen. It was a simple side-by-side. My grandfather's will on the left, the documented distributions on the right. The gap between what should have happened and what did was not a rounding error. It was not a bookkeeping mistake. It was a pattern. The total discrepancy between my distribution and Nathan's relative to equal shares is approximately $35,000, I said. The discrepancy in Derek's distribution is approximately $52,000. That $41,000 reimbursement represents money redirected from a disabled beneficiary to my parents' personal account. In the state of Indiana, fiduciary mismanagement of an estate of this kind, especially involving a vulnerable adult, is not a civil matter. My mother made a sound. A small, involuntary sound. I looked at my father. He was staring at the table. Drop the issue with my condo, I said. Today. And you are going to make Derek whole. You're going to work with Ms. Whitmore and an independent fiduciary to calculate exactly what he was shorted, and you're going to fund a restitution payment to his account within 60 days. If I see so much as an email about my property, this entire file goes to the Indiana Attorney General's office and to the Adult Protective Services Division that oversees Derek's group home. Are we clear? Nathan finally spoke. His voice was strange, stretched thin. Dad, he was stealing from Derek? Your father made some difficult decisions under financial pressure, Mr. Alford started. He stole from a man who can't advocate for himself, I said. Using the authority my grandfather gave him because he trusted him, and then he called it a reimbursement and filed it with the court. My father still hadn't looked at me. He was looking at his hands. My mother was crying quietly into a folded tissue. Her shoulders were shaking in small, contained movements, the way she cried when she didn't want anyone to see. Nathan looked at me for a long moment. His expression had gone through several things I couldn't fully read. Shock, then something that looked like calculation, then something that looked almost like shame. He looked back at our father. I said what I'd come to say. I closed my laptop. I looked at Mr. Bala. Alford, whose practiced composure had slipped just enough to show that he was doing rapid internal calculations about the situation his client had put him in. Miss Whitmore will be in touch, I said. I stood up and I left. I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. My father did not respond the way I expected. I had expected retreat. What I got instead was a quieter, slower retaliation, the kind that doesn't leave fingerprints. He started making phone calls. I found out through a college friend who moved in adjacent professional circles that my father had told someone at a civic organization he belonged to that I was going through some mental health difficulties, that I'd become paranoid and combative, that the family was very worried. He framed it gently, with the practiced concern of a man who had spent decades presenting as a reasonable person. I wasn't a whistleblower. I was a troubled daughter having a breakdown. Nathan, for his part, disappeared into silence. He didn't call me. He didn't text. He and Lauren closed ranks, and I heard nothing from their direction for weeks. What I did hear, through Becca, was that he was upset, not at our father, not about what had been done to Derek or to me. He was upset at me for disrupting things. He was upset that the money might have to be paid back. He was worried about what this meant for his own distribution, whether he'd have to return any of it. That told me everything I needed to know about Nathan. My mother called every few days. The voicemails were long and soft and heartbreaking in the specific way that emotional manipulation is heartbreaking when it comes from someone you used to love simply. She said your father is not sleeping. She said you've always been the strong one and we relied on you too much. And I know that wasn't fair. But Mara, please. She said Derek doesn't even understand what's happening. She said, what does it help anyone to drag this through lawyers? It helps Derek, I said. The one time I picked up. It helps his account. It helps make sure that what Grandpa left him actually reaches him. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I didn't know the full amount. I want you to know that. I knew some of it. But I didn't know the full amount. I believed her. That was almost worse. The retaliation from my father escalated in one specific way that I had anticipated. He still had connections in the business community, not in my industry, but in the adjacent professional world where reputations travel. He mentioned to someone, who mentioned to someone else, that his daughter was engaged in a legal dispute with her family over a deceased relative's estate, and that there were questions about her professional judgment and stability. It was designed to make me pull back, to make the professional cost of pushing forward feel higher than the personal cost of letting it go. I had learned years ago that the best way to respond to that kind of pressure was to move faster than it could travel. Miss Hewell, Whitmore and I had already filed a formal complaint with the Indiana Attorney General's office. We had already contacted Adult Protective Services in Marion County, which oversaw Derek's care facility, and filed a report detailing the estate discrepancy and the misappropriation of funds meant for a vulnerable adult. I had prepared a full copy of my documentation, the probate records, the distribution analysis, the traced transfer, and submitted it to the state's professional licensing board for executors acting in a fiduciary capacity. I had also done one more thing. I had driven to Indianapolis on a Saturday and visited Derek. He was smaller than I remembered from childhood. Thinner, with the same patient eyes and the slow smile that had always made me feel like I was being seen more clearly than I wanted to be. He was sitting in the common room of his group home doing a word search puzzle. When he looked up and recognized me, his face went bright. "Mara," he said, "I haven't seen you in forever." "I know," I said. I sat down next to him. "I'm sorry it's been so long. We talked for an hour." He told me about his job, a part-time position sorting donations at a local thrift store that he was genuinely proud of. He told me about a movie he'd seen twice. He told me he thought about Grandpa sometimes. He said Grandpa used to call him on his birthday without fail, every year, and that he missed that. I didn't tell him about the money that day. There would be time for that conversation, and it would need to be handled carefully with his caseworker present. But I drove home from Indianapolis with something settled and clear in my chest. This was not about me and my father. This was about my grandfather, who had driven the same truck for a decade because he wanted to leave something behind. And about Derek, who had a word search puzzle and a thrift store job and the patient eyes of someone who trusted the people who were supposed to take care of things. The consequences arrived the way consequences do when they've been properly prepared. Not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, official notifications. The Attorney General's office opened a formal investigation into the estate administration within 6 weeks of our filing. My father was notified. His lawyer filed a response. The investigation moved forward anyway because the documentary record was not ambiguous. The probate filings were public. The transfer amounts were verifiable. The gap between what the will directed and what Derek received was not a matter of interpretation. My father's name was removed from the executor record, and a court-appointed independent administrator was assigned to oversee the corrective distribution. The $41,000 transfer was flagged for review, and my father was required to demonstrate legitimate grounds for the reimbursement classification. He could not. The amount was ordered returned to the estate, along with a corrective payment that brought Derek's total distribution to his full legal share. I was present at the court hearing when the final accounting was approved. My father sat across the room with his attorney. He did not look at me once. Afterward, in the hallway, my mother found me. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her coat slightly too big, her eyes red-rimmed. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry." Her voice was very quiet. Not performed quiet. Just quiet. I looked at her. I thought about the calculator I borrowed from the library. I thought about her saying, "You've always been so capable, sweetheart," and meaning it as an explanation for why I got less. "I know," I said. "I know you are." I didn't hug her. But I didn't walk away either. We stood there in the hallway for a moment, two people sorting through something that didn't have a clean resolution, and then she nodded and left. Nathan called me 6 weeks after the hearing. It was the first time we'd spoken since the conference room. He didn't apologize, not exactly. What he said was, I didn't know he'd shortchanged Derek. I don't know what I thought. I assumed it was all handled right. "You didn't ask," I said. "You got $47,000 and you didn't ask why I got 12. He was quiet. "I know," he finally said. "I know I didn't." It wasn't an apology, but it was honest. That was more than I expected. I moved into my condo fully that spring, unpacked everything, hung curtains, built a bookshelf. The Sunday morning coffee shop became a genuine ritual. I went. I ordered the same thing. I read for an hour and let the week reset. My father and I haven't spoken since the hearing. My mother and I talk occasionally, careful conversations that stay on the surface of things, both of us aware that the underneath is still too raw to touch. Derek's distribution cleared in early summer. His caseworker called me to let me know, because I'd asked to be notified. I sent Derek a birthday card the following month, the first one I'd sent in years. He sent me back a hand-drawn card with a truck on it, because he remembered that Grandpa used to drive one. I put it on my refrigerator. There are things I lost. I know that. The family I thought I had, the one where the rules were unfair but at least everyone was operating in good faith, that family didn't exist. Maybe it never did. Maybe I'd just been too busy surviving to look directly at what was actually happening. But here's what I know now that I didn't know when I was sitting in my car in that parking garage, hearing my mother ask me to help Nathan with his rent. The word capable, when people use it to describe you, doesn't always mean what you think it means. Sometimes it means we've decided you don't need what everyone else needs. Sometimes it means we're going to take from you in proportion to how much we think you can lose. I was capable, I am capable. But what I am now, in my condo, with my bookshelf and my Sunday mornings and Derek's truck drawing on my refrigerator, is something more than that. I'm just not paying for the privilege anymore. I've thought a lot about what my grandfather actually understood about people. He drove the same truck for a decade. He called Derek on his birthday every single year without fail. He saved carefully and left a will that said, plainly, equally, because he believed that fairness wasn't complicated. You had what you had, you worked for what you worked for, and when you left something behind, you left it honestly. He trusted my father to carry that out. That trust was the thing that got used against him. What I've come to understand about the whole situation, not just what happened to me, but what happened to Derek, what happened to the money my grandfather spent a lifetime saving, is that it didn't start with greed exactly. It started with a story. The story my father told himself and eventually told everyone else was that some people need more and some people can handle less, and that a capable person absorbing an unfair share is not theft, it's just management. He genuinely believed that version. I think that's the part that took me the longest to sit with, because the story was partly about me. I was the capable one. I was the one who would be fine. And for a long time I accepted that framing as a kind of compliment, which meant I also accepted the material consequences of it without asking questions. That's on me. Not the same way it's on my father, not even close. But I spent years not pulling a thread I could see clearly, and that has its own cost. What changes things is not anger. Anger came and went. What actually changed things was deciding to look directly at what was true and then do something with what I found. That's the triad that I keep coming back to when I think about how any of this resolved the way it did. You have to be honest enough to see clearly even when what you're seeing is about people you love. You have to be skilled enough to do something with what you see, to build the case, run the numbers, find the records, present the facts without flinching. And you have to have the endurance to keep going when the people who benefited from your silence start working to discredit you. My father had connections. He had authority. He had 30 years of being the reasonable man in the room. None of that could hold against a spreadsheet built on public records, because the truth doesn't need connections. It just needs someone patient enough to find it and honest enough to say it out loud. Derek got his money. Not all of it can be recovered. Some years are gone. But what my grandfather intended for him finally reached him, overseen by someone whose only job is to protect his interests. That matters more to me than anything else that came out of this. I still have Derek's birthday card on my refrigerator, a hand-drawn truck in blue marker. He remembered that Grandpa used to drive one. That's what my grandfather was trying to leave behind. Not just money, proof that he saw each of us, that we were all worth the same careful attention. I'm glad I didn't let that disappear quietly.